The house on Maple Street wasn't just a house, it was my sanctuary, my fortress, and the last tangible piece of my uncle who had been more like a father to me. He passed away 5 years ago after battling cancer, and every corner of that 1,800 square foot home held memories I couldn't bear to lose. It was here, in this very living room, where I spent countless nights sitting by his recliner as he told stories about growing up in Chicago during the 70s. And it was here, too, where I watched him take his final breath, surrounded by family, the faint smell of his favorite pipe tobacco still lingering in the air. That house became my anchor when everything else fell apart, when my parents lost their savings in a bad investment, and we nearly had to sell our family car just to keep the lights on. But it wasn't just sentimental, it was survival. The house stood as the only thing keeping me grounded in a life that felt like it was spiraling out of control. Every creaky floorboard and chipped window pane reminded me of how far I'd come since those dark days. Losing it would feel like losing him all over again. So when things started going south with Chloe Madison, the woman I thought I loved, I never imagined she'd set her sights on taking it from me. At first, she played the part of the perfect girlfriend, but soon enough, her true intentions began to surface. She didn't just want a future with me, she wanted my uncle's legacy, no matter what it cost. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment when Chloe Madison's seemingly sweet exterior began to crack, revealing the manipulative core beneath. It was during one of our early dates, a weekend getaway to a nearby city, that she insisted on planning. At first, everything seemed perfect: dinner at an upscale restaurant, laughter over shared desserts, and strolls through bustling streets lined with luxury boutiques. But then, as we passed a high-end designer store, her eyes locked onto a handbag displayed in the window. "Oh my God," she gasped dramatically, her voice dripping with both awe and entitlement. "That bag would go so well with my new coat." She glanced at me expectantly, her smile innocent but laced with something sharper expectation. My stomach sank. That bag cost more than my monthly rent. Still, caught up in the whirlwind of infatuation, I caved. I told myself it was just this once, a gesture to show how much I cared. But just this once quickly spiraled into financial chaos. To afford it, I had to take out a small personal loan, burying myself in debt I couldn't afford. The guilt gnawed at me, but Chloe's delighted reaction made me think it was worth it, at least for now. Things escalated further about 2 months into our relationship. One evening, after a long day at work, I agreed to meet her for coffee before heading home. As we drove back, she suddenly swerved the car toward a parked vehicle, intentionally scraping its side mirror against ours. My heart leapt into my throat. "What the hell, Chloe?" I shouted, adrenaline coursing through my veins. She turned to me, unfazed, and said coolly, "Relax, it's barely a scratch. You'll handle it, right?" Her tone wasn't questioning, it was commanding. When I hesitated, she added, "You know, if you really loved me, you wouldn't make such a big deal out of this." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Against my better judgment, I paid for the repairs, not because I believed it was fair, but because I feared what might happen if I didn't comply. These incidents weren't isolated. They were part of a pattern that slowly tightened around me like a noose. Each demand felt heavier than the last, each manipulation more calculated. Yet, blinded by affection or perhaps desperation, I kept rationalizing her behavior. Maybe she was just insecure, I thought. Maybe she needed reassurance. But deep down, a voice whispered warnings I chose to ignore. Little did I know, these were only the opening moves in a game where the stakes would soon skyrocket, leaving me fighting not just for my finances, but for my freedom and my uncle's legacy. As Chloe Madison's presence in my life grew more suffocating, her behavior shifted from subtle manipulation to outright invasion. It started innocuously enough. She began leaving clothes at my place after weekend visits, then brought over a toothbrush, some makeup, and before I knew it, she had practically moved in without asking for permission. At first, I chalked it up to her impulsive nature, but soon, the signs of control became impossible to ignore. One evening, after coming home late from work, I noticed something was off. The old photo frames on the mantel, pictures of my uncle and me during happier times, were gone. When I confronted her, she shrugged nonchalantly, claiming they were dusty and ugly, so she'd thrown them away. My blood boiled. Those weren't just photos. They were fragments of my past, pieces of who I was. But when I demanded answers, she turned the tables, accusing me of being overly sentimental and immature. Her casual dismissal of my emotions felt like a slap across the face. Things escalated further when I discovered that she had been secretly tampering with other belongings. A vintage clock my uncle left me, smashed because she accidentally knocked it over. An antique lamp passed down through generations, replaced with a cheap IKEA model she deemed more modern. Each item she destroyed felt like another thread unraveling the fabric of my identity. Yet, what truly sent chills down my spine was when I stumbled upon bank statements addressed to her name while sorting through mail one afternoon. They weren't bills or personal correspondence, they were inquiries about mortgage procedures tied to my house. She hadn't told me anything about this, of course. When I questioned her, she laughed it off, saying she was merely curious about how mortgages worked since we might need them someday. But her explanation rang hollow. When I overheard a voicemail she'd forgotten to delete, a banker explaining loan options based on the equity of my property. My stomach churned as realization hit. She wasn't just living in my house. She was plotting to take ownership of it. Every smile, every sweet word suddenly seemed calculated, part of a larger scheme to strip me of everything I held dear. I couldn't sleep that night, paranoia gnawing at me. Was she already planning to sell the house out from under me? Would I wake up one day to find myself locked out of my own home? The thought made my chest tighten. What had once been a sanctuary now felt like a battleground, each corner tainted by her greed and deceit. The nightmare reached its crescendo when Chloe Madison's desperation turned into outright madness. After her failed attempts to manipulate me through emotional blackmail and false accusations, she escalated her tactics to levels I could never have anticipated. One evening, as I was leaving work, a detective approached me with unsettling news. A new witness had come forward, a man claiming to have seen me physically assaulting Chloe in a parking lot months prior. My blood ran cold. This couldn't be real. But then it hit me, she'd hired someone to fabricate evidence against me. The so-called witness even provided photos of what appeared to be an altercation between us, though they were grainy and clearly staged. It was all part of her twisted plan to make the case against me seem airtight. But that wasn't the worst of it. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of shattering glass. Heart pounding, I grabbed a baseball bat from my closet and crept downstairs. There, in my living room, stood Chloe, dressed in ripped clothes and covered in fake blood. She had broken into my house while I slept, smashing one of my windows to create the illusion of a violent struggle. When I confronted her, she smirked, holding up her phone. "You're too late," she sneered. "I already called 911. They'll be here any minute." Her voice dripped with venom as she explained how this would finally prove I was unstable and abusive. Panic surged through me, not because I doubted my innocence, but because I knew how easily people believe lies when presented with just enough theatrics. As if breaking into my home and staging a crime scene weren't enough, Chloe unleashed her final weapon, humiliation. Over the next few hours, my phone began buzzing incessantly. Friends, family members, even coworkers texted me, asking why nude photos of me were circulating online. At first, I thought it was some cruel prank. But then I realized the truth. Chloe had stolen intimate images from my private cloud storage, a vulnerability I hadn't known existed, and sent them directly to everyone in my contact list. Alongside each photo was a caption mocking me, calling me a liar and a predator who hid behind a facade of normalcy. My stomach churned as I imagined my parents seeing those pictures, imagining their disappointment and shame. What made it worse was the accompanying message she sent to my inbox. "If you don't sign over the house by tomorrow morning, these won't just stay within your inner circle. Imagine what happens when they go viral." Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. For a moment, I considered giving in, just handing over the damn house to end the torment, but something inside me snapped. No matter how far she pushed, no matter how much fear she instilled, I refused to let her win. I contacted my lawyer immediately, forwarding every piece of evidence I had collected thus far, security footage showing her breaking in, screenshots of her threats, and timestamps proving the falsified nature of the evidence she'd concocted. My attorney assured me we now had more than enough ammunition to counterattack. That night, as I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the shattered window frame, I realized how close I'd come to losing everything, not just the house, but my dignity, my reputation, my sanity. Chloe Madison wasn't just trying to take my property. She was trying to dismantle my entire life, piece by piece. And yet, despite the chaos swirling around me, I found a flicker of resolve. If she wanted a war, she'd get one, but this time, I held all the cards. The process of gathering evidence against Chloe Madison was nothing short of a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, where every move I made seemed to provoke her into more dangerous retaliation. After consulting with my attorney, I installed a discreet security camera at the front door, a decision that would later save me from ruin. But what I didn't anticipate was how quickly Chloe would catch on. One evening, as I covertly recorded one of our heated arguments in my living room using a small voice recorder tucked in my pocket, she suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes narrowed, and her gaze darted toward my jacket. "What's that?" she demanded, lunging for it before I could react. My heart pounded as I wrestled the device away, but not without her catching a glimpse of it. She exploded in rage, screaming accusations that I was trying to set her up while hurling insults about my supposed paranoia. For a moment, I thought she might physically attack me, her hands balled into fists, and her face flushed with fury, but she stormed out instead, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the walls. That night, I barely slept, haunted by the realization that she now knew I was onto her. Things escalated further when Chloe discovered the security camera outside my house. It wasn't long before I noticed scratches on the lens or wires tampered with, clear signs someone had tried to disable it. Each time, I'd rush to repair the damage, my anxiety mounting. The worst incident happened late one rainy night when I heard faint rustling near the porch. Peering through the blinds, I saw a shadowy figure fiddling with the camera mount. Adrenaline surged through me as I grabbed a flashlight and shouted, "Who's there?" The figure froze for a split second before bolting into the darkness. Though I couldn't identify them, I was certain it was Chloe or someone working for her. From that point on, I reinforced the camera setup with additional locks and alarms, praying they'd hold. But perhaps the most chilling moment came when Mr. Harper, an elderly neighbor who had agreed to testify after witnessing some of Chloe's erratic behavior, vanished without a trace. He had seen her pounding on my door during one of her late-night tantrums and even overheard her threatening me. When I went to thank him for agreeing to cooperate, his house was eerily silent. His car remained parked in the driveway, yet no lights were on inside. A week later, his family confirmed he had abruptly left town, citing vague health concerns. They refused to share details, but their nervous glances spoke volumes. Had Chloe intimidated him into silence? Or worse, had she orchestrated something far darker? The uncertainty gnawed at me, leaving me constantly on edge. Despite these setbacks, I refused to back down. Every text message, every recording, every timestamp became ammunition in my arsenal. I meticulously documented everything: her emails demanding money, her social media posts hinting at revenge, even screenshots of fake legal letters sent by her supposed attorney. Each piece of evidence felt like a lifeline, pulling me further away from her web of deceit. Yet, the weight of it all pressed heavily on my shoulders. There were nights when paranoia consumed me. Every creak in the floorboards, every unfamiliar car passing by, felt like another threat looming closer. Still, I clung to the hope that justice would prevail. If Chloe wanted a war, she had no idea just how determined I was to win. The courtroom drama reached its peak when Chloe Madison, once so confident in her manipulative schemes, began to unravel under the weight of her own lies. Just as we thought the case was moving toward a swift resolution, she pulled out one last desperate card: bribery. During a routine meeting with the lead detective, she allegedly slipped an envelope containing cash across the table, whispering that this could all go away if he simply looked the other way. Unbeknownst to her, the entire exchange was captured on audio thanks to a hidden recorder the detective had activated as soon as he sensed something off. When confronted, Chloe's face turned ghostly pale, but she quickly recovered, claiming it was a misunderstood gesture meant to cover legal fees for mediation. The judge didn't buy it. This blatant attempt at corruption only deepened the hole she'd dug for herself, further cementing her image as someone who believed she was above the law. But Chloe wasn't done yet. On the day of the trial, just as the prosecution was presenting damning evidence including security footage of her threats and forged documents, she suddenly collapsed onto the floor, feigning a fainting spell. Gasps filled the room as paramedics rushed in, and the proceedings were abruptly halted. For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. Was this another ploy to delay justice, or was she genuinely unwell? My fears were confirmed when, hours later, doctors cleared her of any medical issues, stating she was physically fine. Her act had been nothing more than a calculated move to buy time, perhaps hoping to exploit procedural delays or sway public sympathy. Instead, it backfired spectacularly. The judge, visibly irritated by the disruption, ordered the trial to resume immediately, warning that any further stunts would result in contempt charges. What followed next was the most shocking revelation of all. As investigators delved deeper into Chloe's past, they uncovered a pattern of similar scams targeting vulnerable individuals. One victim, a retired teacher named Mrs. Evelyn Carter, testified that Chloe had befriended her after pretending to be a distant relative, only to swindle her out of thousands in savings through fake investment schemes. Another man, a widower in his late 60s, recounted how she seduced him with promises of marriage before draining his bank account and disappearing. Each story painted a chilling portrait of a woman who thrived on deception and exploitation. By the time closing arguments rolled around, the courtroom buzzed with outrage. Even some of Chloe's former friends, who initially defended her, publicly distanced themselves, calling her actions unforgivable. When the verdict was finally read guilty on all counts, the relief that washed over me was indescribable. Chloe stared daggers at me from across the room, her lips trembling with barely contained rage. But this time, I didn't flinch. She had tried every trick in the book to destroy me, yet here I stood, victorious. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but think about how far she'd fallen. What started as a twisted quest for my uncle's house had spiraled into a web of lies so vast it ensnared countless others. Karma, it seemed, had caught up with her in the most poetic way possible. The aftermath of Chloe Madison's relentless campaign against me was like living in the shadow of a storm that refused to dissipate. Even after her arrest, the fallout continued to haunt every corner of my life. It started with anonymous phone calls, grainy, distorted voices whispering threats late at night. "You think it's over," one rasped menacingly. "We're watching you." My parents became collateral damage. Their home number was flooded with hang-up calls and cryptic messages warning them to stay out of this. Each ring sent a jolt of panic through our household. I couldn't shake the feeling that she had accomplices, or worse, that her toxic influence extended beyond prison walls. The paranoia consumed me, making even mundane tasks feel dangerous. Walking to my car in broad daylight felt like stepping into a sniper's crosshairs. Every unfamiliar face seemed suspicious, every passing vehicle a potential threat. The stress bled into my work life as well. Despite my boss offering unwavering support, I knew I couldn't function effectively while constantly looking over my shoulder. After a particularly harrowing incident where someone left a dead rat on my doorstep with a note reading, "This could have been your dog," I made the difficult decision to take a leave of absence. Staying safe felt more urgent than meeting deadlines or pleasing clients. For weeks, I barely left my house, relying on grocery deliveries and avoiding anything that might expose me further. But isolation only deepened the darkness creeping inside me. Sleep eluded me for nights on end, replaced by vivid nightmares of Chloe breaking back into my house, her eyes wild with vengeance. When exhaustion finally claimed me, it came in short bursts, leaving me drained and hollow. Eventually, I sought professional help, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Sitting in a therapist's office for the first time, I broke down recounting how Chloe had invaded not just my home, but my mind. She wasn't physically present anymore, yet her presence lingered like a poison seeping into my thoughts. The psychologist diagnosed me with acute anxiety and PTSD, prescribing therapy sessions twice a week along with medication to stabilize my sleep patterns. At first, I resisted the idea of pills. I didn't want to admit how broken I felt, but desperation outweighed pride. Slowly, the fog began to lift, though scars remained. Looking back, I realized how close I came to unraveling completely. Those months were a blur of fear, anger, and self-doubt. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was a strange clarity. I survived something unimaginable. And while the road to recovery was long, each small victory reminded me that no matter how far Chloe tried to push me toward ruin, I'd always find a way to stand back up.